Back again, and welcome back to another video within this episode on the coding workshop. But before I start, let's wish everyone a belated Merry Christmas. I hope you all enjoy the festive holidays, because I know I have, and I'm hoping that the new year is going to bring a bit more prosperity, a bit more organization, and finally we're on the road to fighting this pandemic. But that's not what this video is about. We're going to be jumping straight in where we left off, which is our data table, which is what we were displaying in our last video. But in this one, I'm going to try and finish off that component so we can then move on to something a little bit different. But before I do that, on the last video, you can see I've got a screen set up right here, and this is pretty much where we left off. You can see that we're getting an error when we sort of like try to sort our data. So we're going to fix that, and it's a really simple fix because it's stuff that we've already done. We're just going to go back in and enable it and try and get this to work properly. So without further ado, I'm going to change my screen again so you can see my code editor. So I'm going to walk you through the bits that need changing to get this to work properly. So I'm going to change my screen now, go back to that main screen, and the first place I want to take you is in my router, because again I've added in a method that is going to help us to extract away all the unwanted characters that we get when we're using our server or a query string within our server variable. So we can clear that away, and that would allow us to render or load this particular screen properly. So I'm going to open up my router file, and I want to come down to my dispatch method, because I've got a method here which I've created, and it's going to help us to format these query string variables and do away with them so we can actually get this working. And the method is just down here at the bottom, which is format query string. Now we're taking in that URL parameter, and we're basically just stripping away any unwanted characters, right? And back up into our dispatch method, we're just going to pass that off, and we're going to pass in that URL that's coming from our dispatch argument. And I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my other screen, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to reload. And nothing's going to change visually until I click one of these links. So reload, nothing changes, but when I click this link now, you notice that we're no longer getting that error, because we've done away with, or we've used our method that I've just showed you to clear up or to help extract away any unwanted characters. So we're now able to, you can also see that we are, bring this up a bit more. Well, you can't see it from right there, but in our URI, you can see that when we click that link, it's change from description or descending to ascending. I hope you can see that right up here in your URI box. So that's changing, and that's working exactly how we want it to work, but nothing changes right here, and that's because we need to go in and modify our query, which is what we're going to do next. So change my screen again. I'm going to take you back to, let's close this out. The next file we're going to go and modify is our query builder. Let's open that up. Let's open up this abstract query builder as well, because we have created these methods already. We've already created them, and we're going to go in and fix them up so they actually do what we want it to do. And these are two methods that I am referring to. There's order by query and this query offset. And all these are doing is adding additional fragments onto our query to help us to sort our query by whatever column that we want. And the second one is adding that limit and that offset so we can create pagination from that query. And that's all it is. I mean, we've done these from the very get-go when we were building this query builder, and they've just been there sitting, waiting. And where we're going to put these is back into our query builder class. If we scroll down to this as condition method, this is where we're going to execute these 2 blocks of code. So we're going to undo those lines and save it. And when I reload this page, I'm going to bring it back to my screen. Once I reload this page, I'm expecting to see changes. So let's do that. Reload. And right away you can see that we're now applying those additional fragments to our query. So we're adding that order by column and that limit and offset strings to that query string that we're using to pull this data from our database. And you notice that we've got 10 records right here, and that's where we've defined this within that controller.yaml file we've got. So I'm going to demonstrate, let's bring it back. I'm going to demonstrate in that config directory, which is outside this folder, this config directory, this controller.yaml file. You can see that we got records per page, and this is where we're defining how many records that we want to show per page. So I can demonstrate by changing 10 to 5. Let me get my screen back up. So if I save that and reload this page, you see that we've only now got 5 records. So I can actually just play around with this just to show you that it's actually coming from this file. Say 1, reload, we're only getting 1 records back per page, and I'm going to set that back to 10, right? And save. And you can see that it's actually working how we want. So the next test is to actually test that our sortable columns are actually doing what we want as well. So if I click that link, I'm expecting to see these columns being sorted. So if I click it, and there we go. They're now working exactly how we want by just adding those additional fragments to the query. So that's working fine as we want. I can also demonstrate that we can sort by different columns. So if I bring it back to my main screen and I open up my data columns, right, I can say I want email columns to be sortable. So if I click true, or turn that into true, save it, bring it back to the page, and I reload, I'm expecting to see this email address becomes a link or becomes linkable. So if I reload, there you go. We're now getting that link on that email address, and if I click it, you can see also that it's now sorting that data via email, right? By the email column, and they both work. So that's the sortable part of our table complete. We're now going to go in and build our pagination, and we're going to link that to our table and try and complete this data table component, right? So let's do that now. So I'm going to take you back to my code editor so you can follow along and see how I'm about to put this actual pagination method together. Right, so I'm going to close these out because I'm finished with these for the time being. And I need to go into my data table and data table class. If I scroll down, this is the class that we built in our last video. And we add this method pagination, which we didn't create yet, but we're going to create it now in this video and link it to our data table and see if we're going to be able to scroll through different parts of our table. All right, so let's just get rid of that. So all I want to do at the moment is try and write the bit of code that's going to get this to work. I won't wrap it in any element because, as you can tell, we haven't got any CSS just as yet, so there'd be no point in doing that. So I'm just going to write the code out that's going to get our links to work, to navigate up and down, and then off screen, well, later on when we come to be putting some CSS in, we can then come back and wrap it into some wrapping tag or div elements, etc. So for the time being, all I want to do is just create the next and previous links that's going to allow us to scroll through our data table. So I'm going to start by declaring some empty variable, or declaring one empty variable called element, assign it to an empty string. So I'm going to say element concatenate printf function, and what I want to do within this is display some metadata. Like, for example, we can show within this metadata, we can show the current page that we're on, and how many data we've got in our database that we're scrolling through. So I'm going to put that information within this print function and print that out along with the next and previous links. So I'm going to say is showing, put some quotes, comma, and then I want to actually pass in the data that I'm going to use to display the necessary information. And this data is going to be coming from this method, this get repository parts method that we've declared or defined within our last video, because this contains all the information that we need to also display our pagination. So the first one I'm going to take out of that is I need that this current page, also need this total pages. I think that's what it's called, total pages. Let's check that. It's called total pages yet. And the last one we need is this total records. Right? So let's try and format this in a way that's going to make sense on the screen. So we want to say we're showing showing current page. So we're going to put our first variable, our first placeholder, in a %s. So it's showing current page. We're going to say current page of total pages, which is the next %sign s, which is placeholder, and this is in the order of how we've declared these variables. So we've got the first one, which is going to display the current page, the second one, which is going to display the total page, and the third one is going to display the total records. So it's showing current page of total page, or I should say off total record. So instead of saying off right here, let's put a hyphen. So we got that. I mean, it's gonna make more sense once we see it, and we can change this depending on how it looks. So let's not worry about that for now. Let's just fix this element. Right. So the next thing we want to do is actually declare a couple of variables that's going to help us to navigate our data table based on our sortable column as well, because we want to be able to concatenate our paging onto our sorting column variables, so we can then navigate through those columns, right? So I'm going to create a variable called query status, and I'm going to say equal this sort controller query, and I'm going to say this sort controller query, else return an empty string. So what we're saying is that if we got a query within, or if we're using the sortable column, or we've got something in the query, then just use that, else return nothing. And remember, this query is coming from that that controller, that YAML file, which we've got within our config directory, right? And the next variable I'm going to create is status, and that's going to equal is it use that get and use that get to get the query status, right? Or if we got that, get it, query status, else do nothing, return an empty string, right? So that's going to help us to concatenate our navigation onto our whatever query that we're querying by, right? So for example, if we're querying by user status, i.e. pending or trash or whatever status that we've set, we can concatenate our pagination onto that, and we can scroll through our data table based on that particular query, right? Forget what I said about the columns earlier. That's nothing to do with this. That's nothing to do with that particular bit. This is simple, sort of like allowing us to scroll through our data table based on whatever query that we've set, or whatever query we got in our URI, right? So with that said, the next thing that we need to do now is we need to start building our previous link. So what we're going to say, if this current page equal 1, let's do something. So again, remember what I said, the current page is a variable or a property that we've defined in our last video that's coming from our get repository parts method, and that contains all the value that we need. So what we're saying is that if this current page equal 1, meaning if the current page is our very first page, then obviously we can't go back because that's our very first page. So what we want to do is to make our previous link non or unclickable, so we can't click it. So I'm going to wrap that in a sprint f function as well, and I'm going to say element concatenate sprint f, and I'm going to just pass in a JavaScript void function, and that's going to make our link unclickable, so you could click it but nothing will happen, right? And all we need to do in here is to wrap that into an anchor tag. So I'm going to say href, and I'm going to say previous. Let's just fix that up. Previous, and I'm going to pass this placeholder within that anchor, so when we click it, it does nothing, right? And we've added that previous. And you also notice that I didn't put an end tag onto here because we're not quite finished. We're going to add more to this, and then we're going to add that end tag at the end. So we're saying if it's a current page, do that, else. So else, I'm going to say if status, which is this variable that we've just created, if we've got a value within our status or our get parameter, let's use that, and let's concatenate our pagination link onto that particular status. So if status, we're going to say element sprintf, right? And we're going to pass in that status variable, and we're also going to pass in a next variable called the current page. So I'm going to say this current page, and I'm going to say -1, right? So what we're saying is that if we are not on our first page, then we're going to step down, which will allow us to go backwards with our previous links, right? Let's semicolon onto there, and let's build out our next anchor tag. So it's going to be href, and again, no closing tag because we're going to close it at the bottom. So what we're going to pass in right here is we're going to pass in a query string, and it's going to be query concatenate that query status, right? And we're going to say equal placeholder, so it's %s, and and page equal %s, right? So the first placeholder is going to be whatever our query status is, i.e. it could be pending or active, etc. So we're saying query status, which is going to print out that status column from our database table, which is going to be status, right? So it's going to be status equal active and page equal whatever the current page we're going back to. So that's basically what that's doing. And we're going to say else. So if the query status is empty, then we're just going to render it as a normal pagination, as how it is by default. Render all that records. We're going to go previous on all the records or next on all the records, right? So our query status is empty, so we're just going to bypass that and use our pagination as normal, right? So I'm going to say element printf again, and we're going to pass in one variable. So it's going to be our one property. To be this, to be current page. That's going to -1. Let's wrap this into some parentheses as well, like so. And anchor tag again, href, and still no closing tag yet. And all we're going to do is pass in that placeholder right there, right? Or actually, it should be page equal placeholder, just like that, because we're adding this query parameter to our URL so we can scroll through our data table. And outside of those if statements, just out here, I want to add that closing anchor tag. So I'm going to say closing tag, just like that. And I also want to put that previous link in there as well, just like that. So we're going to build our next link, and then we're going to go and test it and then make any changes if necessary based on how it's looking, right? So to build our next tag, we're going to start off by saying if this current page equal this total pages, then let's do something. And again, we're going to start off by creating that element concatenate printf, and we're going to pass in a couple of variables or a couple of arguments. And the first one is going to be the JavaScript void again. So it's going to be JavaScript void, which is going to be 0. And let's pass in our anchor tag. And again, we're going to leave it open and close it at the bottom. I'm just going to put our next link right there and pass in that placeholder. So this is quite similar to the first one, where we're saying if current page equal 1, then we can't go backward because that's a current page. We're also saying the same thing right here with this one. If current page equal total pages, then there's no next. We can't go next because we're at the limit, right? So again, we're going to say else. And within that else, we're going to add our if status block again. And we're saying element printf, and we're saying we're going to pass in one argument, which is going to be this current page, and we're going to increment upwards now. So we're going to increment by 1 upwards, right? In the previous, we're sort of like decreasing by 1. In this, we're increment upwards. So let's wrap that into some parentheses, just like so. Let's put in our anchor tag, href, just like that. And actually we need to pass in that status as well, because this is going to be quite similar to the first one. So we're going to pass in that query parameter within this href. So I'm going to say question sign, that's going to be query status, that's going to equal placeholder 1, which is going to be the actual status, pending, active, IE, etc. And that's going to say and page equal the next page that we're scrolling to, which is going to be the second placeholder, which is going to be the current page plus 1, right? Just like that. So else, if the status is empty, that's rendered as a normal pagination. So we're going to say else element printf again, and we're going to pass in parentheses this time, this current page plus 1, semicolon, just like that. I'm going to say anchor tag href, no closing tag, to say question sign page equal first placeholder, which is going to be %sign and s, because we've only got the one property that we're passing back in, right? Just like that. I'm going to pass in or create or end tag or ending anchor tag outside of this if statement. I'm going to say element, we say closing anchor tag, right? Then we're going to write next, just like that. So let's just return this element and let's go and test this out within our controller class. Remember, we've got no HTML wrapping around these, so we're not expecting it to be displayed in a nicely format, but nevertheless it should give us the links that we need to be able to click next to scroll through this data table. So we're going to go back up to into our controller class. We're going to get our own controller, which is what we were working in first, and this is where we left off in our last video. And let me say this again, this won't be the final output of how this method is going to look. So for the purpose of testing, I'm going to actually do something that I am not going to do in our final output, which I'm going to create a next datatable object just so we can get that pagination method in. So I'm going to create a string called pagination, which is what we're going to pass into our HTML template. I'm going to say new data table, and I want to call that create method. Again, let's just copy and paste this. Don't have to write it out again. Let's just copy it from this bit to there. Copy. Let's just paste that right there. And this time we want to call the pagination method, which is right there, just like that. And again, because I've created a new datatable object, I have to then pass in these same values like what we did up top, because we need these data in order to sort of like render our data table. So that's why we're doing that. But again, it won't be done like this. We're going to have dependency injection, and we're only going to be injecting this object once and then use it throughout this actual class, right? But for testing purposes, I'm just going to do it like this. So let's get our template, and it's our index template, and we're going to just render it at the bottom underneath this table, and it's called pagination in lowercase, just like so. Let's just check that again. Pagination. Let's just reload our page and see what happens. Let's bring it up, bringing my screen on. Let's reload. right? And we're getting 2 previous links and we're getting 1 next link. So we can actually fix that, but the main part of what we want is actually showing. So we say we're showing 1 to 12 of 114 records, which is correct. So we're on page 1 and we got 114 records, and we're dividing that by 10 because we're showing 10 records per table, which is bringing back 12 pages, right? So let's try and click on next link and see what happens. All right, so that's working. We've gone to the next page, next again, and it's showing page 2 of 12. So let's scroll through all 12 pages to make sure it's working. You can see it also in our URI bar. You can see that we've got that concatenate going on. The question sign page equal to. Let's click next again. Now we've got page 3, and it's showing 3 of 12. Next, 4 of 12, 5 of 12, 6 of 12, 7 of 12, 8 of 12, 9 of 12, 10 of 12, 11 of 12, 12 of 12. And you also notice once we get to the end, it shows a next link again. I will sort that out, but one of these links, it's not clickable because now it's showing that JavaScript void. If I go into the source, I can actually show you what it's doing. Okay, see, now it's printing that JavaScript void because we're now at the end of the result, and that link is no longer clickable, or it's clickable but it won't do anything. So let's try our previous link now. So going back to page 11, if I look at the source again, you can see that JavaScript void has now gone because now our next link is showing page 12. I don't think you can see it, but believe what I'm saying. So previous, back to page 10, page 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you see now we've got 2 previous links again, but again, they're not clickable. They don't go anywhere. But I will fix those up. But the main point of what I want is to create a pagination. And you can see that it's working perfectly fine apart from the formatting. So we're going to have to sort that out in the next video. But the gist of this one is to get it to work. And it's working perfectly fine. And we got sortable, we got sorting, and we've got our pagination, right? Which is what we're after. So let me try and actually put in some status and see if we can get records back based on a particular status. If I put status equal active, so that works perfectly fine as well, guys. You can see that we've got 4 records in our database that's got that active status, which is what you're seeing right here. It's active, 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 active. And there's only 4 records in our database that is active. And you can see our pagination also changes based on that status. So we're getting back 1 to 1, which means we've got 1 row of data, or 1 page of data, which is showing 4 results. And if we click next, you notice that nothing happened, but because there's obviously only 4 results, so there's no previous nor there's no next, so it blanks out at that. So if I change this to pending, just to test it, so pending, reload, you can see we've got 100 records in our database that's pending. So you can now see that we can scroll through them. You can see that we've concatenated the paging onto that status, which is what I was discussing earlier. So we can scroll through that, as you can see. So again, we've got 10 pages, 10 results per page, that equals 100 results, right? You can see we can no longer go next because that's it. We've maxed out, but we can go back. So you can see that's working perfectly fine. Again, that's the end of this particular component. We're going to fine tune it as we go along, or I'm going to fine tune it off screen, and when I make any significant changes, I will come back and I'll show you what I'm doing. But obviously we've got no formatting going on. It's just pure data that we're outputting just to demonstrate the usage of this pagination. And again, that works. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video coming up very shortly, and we're going to crack on with a different component, or possibly try and start building an application, then add components in as we go along. But we're going to be making use of what we've done so far, and so you guys can see how it actually works within an actual component with some CSS styling and some JavaScript going on as well. So that's this video, guys. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video coming up very shortly. Thanks and bye.